He's getting to the root of what is it really about. And what it's really about is a hatred of the old classical liberal, by which I mean free market order. That's what it is, hatred of. And that's why it was very easy for people to move from one party to the other, be a communist one day, a Nazi the next. What you share in common is the common enemy. You hate the free market. You have to engage in some sort of planning. And of course, Hitler, it wasn't too difficult for him to find what his enemy would be.
But see, here's the problem. And, you know, I was talking to somebody the other day. To understand the reaction of 1913 and giving us the Fed, you have to understand the collapse of in 1908. To understand that one, you have to understand, what was it, 1893. I mean, free markets come up and they collapse. They come up and they collapse. It's a cycle. But that's how they get you. Because they say, we're not going to have that. Don't worry about that. We're going to take, that was the promise of the central bank. We're going to take all that risk out.
And yet what's interesting, Glenn, is that what they always do is they create these problems and then they pose as the ones who are going to solve them. If you look at the period from 1873 to the time of the Fed, Canada is not actually having bank panic. So how come in the U.S. we see them again and again? It's because of regulation, it turns out. More regulation, less stability, believe it or not. At the state level, many of the states imposed unit banking laws, said every bank can have only one office. Well, that obviously makes every bank extremely fragile and undiversified. So when it came time for the Great Depression, 9,000 U.S. banks fail. You know how many Canadian banks fail? 0. And it's not because Canada had a central bank to rescue them. They didn't get their central bank till the mid-1930s. So they give us the phony narrative, and then they pose as the saviors, and people go for this.
When we come back, I want to introduce you to a man who risked jail just to read this book. I want to introduce you to somebody who understands the loss of freedom. And can you think of a book that you would... Can you even imagine yourself possibly going to jail to read a book? You'll meet him next. Tonight I have a story that you must hear. You must ask yourself at the end of this hour, what is America's future? What are we facing? And where do we go from here? What is your role in that decision? You probably have either heard or have said to somebody yourself, oh, this book, it changed my life. Did it really? And how much did you have vested in that book? How difficult was it for you to read? My next guest, he knows about the road to serfdom. First, you have to understand what he went through just to read the book. 1971, Soviet Union. If he was caught reading The Road to Serfdom, if anybody was caught reading Road to Serfdom, he could go to jail. You can find it in any library. You can go to the bookstore right now. You can go to Amazon, click, and get it. He would go to jail. The friend who gave him the book could get 12 years of hard labor for disseminating anti-socialist propaganda. He read The Road to Serfdom, and it changed his life. Years later, he, and I use this term, I know you're going to correct me on it, defected from the Soviet Union. His name is Yuri Maltsev. He is the professor of economics at Carthage College. Yes, somebody who grew up in the Soviet Union teaching economics. And he's better than all the clowns in Washington. He is also the editor of Requiem for Marx. How are you, sir?
Well, thank you. I'm very well.
I have been looking forward to speaking to you today because you were actually in college when you read it. And you were allowed to read this book, but it was like one of those books that was kept under lock and key, right?
Yes. Later, after I read the book, I've changed my major to economic history and history of economic thought. So then they gave me permission to read under closed doors, and I would write kind of a pledge that I will never tell anybody about the book, which I'm breaking right now.
Well, you might be arrested by our own DOJ any day soon on this. When you read it, what was it that connected with you?
what was amazing for me, it was kind of like developing a film. I mean, a lot of things that I was thinking about, because if you were born in the Soviet Union, raised in Soviet Union, then you can see a country which was really too big to fail, failed. And it was not providing enough food, enough clothes, enough housing, enough anything for these people. And we were trying to figure out why. And definitely we're looking for answers. And these answers were all there in this.
Did you ever discuss them in college? You could read it, but could you then discuss it and say, hey, we're doing all these things. Maybe that's the problem.
Yes, then you would discuss it in Eastern Siberia and hard labor camp.
Right.
And no, I would discuss it only with people I trusted. Back in all socialist countries, usually people would have a group of people whom they trust. And then otherwise it would be impossible to survive. But you were all the time very much aware that you could be reported.
My wife brought me to the mall this weekend. And that's always a great experience. Standing there with the dresses by the hangers, and she's in the other room. You're just like, no, I don't need any help. Nothing fits me in this dress size. But so I was standing there, and people kept coming up to me. And what I found absolutely amazing is every person that came up to me in the mall that weekend, or this last weekend, was either from Cuba, or they were from a former Soviet Union country. And they were all coming up and saying the same thing. You got to keep going. Americans don't get it. They don't see it. Can you explain what that even means?
Absolutely, because that's the people who saw the devil in the eye. I traveled quite a lot with my students to Cuba, because if you go to Cuba, it's the best inoculation against socialism that you can ever have.
No, you didn't see the Michael Moore film. No, I've heard they have tremendous health care.
This is so disgusting. It's agitprop of Soviet type. I mean, the Sicko, you mean, movie?
Yeah.
Yes, there's only one healthcare kind of in Cuba. It's to swim to Miami right away. There's no other healthcare system. I've been to Cuba many times, and I can attest to that.
So what is it that you see that the regular American doesn't see?
Well, I think that people are taking liberty, freedom as granted, and that's why many of us, they think that it will be all the time here, and they don't see the symptoms of this awful disease which ruined the country I came from. Because the Soviet Union, can you imagine, was a country of 11 time zones, of almost everything, and the country became dirt poor, completely devastated by its own government, which murdered over 50 million people,
including
of their own people,
including
my own grandfather.
I know that our producer asked you, because you just kind of glossed over that, and our producer said, wait, can you go back to that? And the notes that I read before I met you, you don't even know how he died or why they killed him, right?
Yes, well, I mean, the family, there is a story that he was asked to build dacha for Stalin. He was an architect, and he said, I'll do that after I'll finish my current project. And that was already a death sentence at that time. Stalin created, I think, the regime of random murders, and then everybody is scared. If you kill people because they're anti-communists or because they belong to this race or to that ethnicity, then at least some people can feel themselves in safety. Stalin was murdering everybody, just so nobody could figure out how to change their behavior, and that's why the scare, that scare is still in Russian people who elected colonel of the KGB as their president.
I was reading, which is amazing.
Amazing.
I read diaries. I've been reading diaries. We're doing some specials, and I'm reading diaries of people that were Jewish in Germany. And they said, we didn't trust anyone. And now, afterwards, we still don't really trust anyone. Once you've lived in that kind of society for a while, in that country, afterwards, you're still kind of, was he wrong, or is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
America, we're going to come back in just a second. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Hayek and the road to serfdom. But as I sit here and look at a man who risked his life to read the book, read a book that it may not change your life. You may read it and go, It may change your life. But you have the opportunity to go online and grab something that he risked his life to read. Aren't you just a little curious on why somebody who is building a giant state government wouldn't want you to read it? And aren't you just a little curious, if this is the first time you've ever heard of Road to Serfdom, why that is? Gosh, it seems like a pretty important book. Why don't we teach this everywhere? Decide for yourself. Go online now and order it, Road to Serfdom. Back in just a second.